In this video, we will have a look at the overall Matlab environment. So how it looks when you start it up, how to move around it, and so on. So let's get started. Once you have installed Matlab, you will find it in your applications folder, or there will be a desktop shortcut. So just click on it and it will start booting up. So Matlab has this very recognizable icon, and it takes a while to start up, so please be patient. If you use a bit slower computer and you start to be impatient, don't try to start it up again, because then the computer will actually try to open two parallel Matlabs, and that's very heavy computational burden on the processor. So just be patient. In the end, it will start up. Maybe if there is no reaction in 2 minutes or so, then you should try again. But once it boots up, this is how it roughly looks. Now it depends if you're using a Mac or a Windows machine. It depends also whether you have actually opened Matlab on your computer before or not. But this is a rough look that it should have. For a while before it shows ready here, once it's booting, it will be saying initializing. So once it's initializing, this prompt symbol wouldn't be here yet. And that means that you have to wait before you start doing anything. But now my Matlab is ready, which means that we can start doing different things in it. The arrangement of windows in here may vary once again, depending on whether you put it up first time and in which system and so on. Now, this big white window here is called command window. So that's the one where you can execute commands one by one. For instance, if you want to do some simple calculations or operations. That's also the place where you can see your numerical results. So if your program is calculating something and displaying the results, then this is the place where you can see, this is the basic output place for your results. Then we have up here in the menu, there's many things. Once you boot it up, and there's the command window, so this is kind of by default placed at home. Once you start using editor, there will be an extra sheet here called editor, which will allow you actually see more options for operating in the editor, but we'll get there in a while. Now here on the left, there is the current folder, and this location is the same one as you can see here in this bar. So once again, since I have worked in the Matlab I have installed now on my machine, I see the last location where I used to work. This has changed a little bit over years in Matlab. Before, this default folder, once you boot Matlab fresh, would always go into the kind of root folder where it used to be somewhere in maybe users, applications, Matlab. But these days it stays in the last location that it remembers, but it can be changed. And what is important, you have to remember that once you run something in here, Matlab kind of has its brains, its working memory in that very folder. So when you try to refer to some functions you might have from someone, you have to make sure that it is actually placed in this folder you see here, or you will have to change the folder before you start working. Once again, once we start working, making files and running them, it will be easier to see in practice what it means. So there's the current folder, and then there is something called Workspace. So now Workspace is Matlab's memory from this very session you're running, and that means the variables you have created and the results you've obtained. So now it's empty because I have booted up Matlab fresh. But when I start inserting commands and assigning values to variables, this will change. And you might also have in your view something called command history. So that's a place where you would see the most recently executed commands done in the command window. If you boot up Matlab for the first time, it will be empty. If it's not the first time, if you've done something in there before, there might be some commands visible from before. Okay, so when it comes to working in Matlab, so as I said, command window is a place where you actually can execute commands, and it's pretty simple. So basically what you do is you type whatever you like to be executed. Now I will not do any calculations yet, but let's say, or let's do a simple math, 5 plus 6. So this is a command I want to be executed, and to run it, I just have to press enter once I'm finished typing. And then Matlab will give me the answer. In this case, 5 plus 6 is 11, so yes, it actually calculated it correctly. I didn't give to this I didn't assign this calculation to any variable, so I didn't give it a name. That's why Matlab is using default name for it. It's called uns. So uns will always mean the last unnamed result. So now it means that if and also it is a variable, it's called uns, so actually this is the first thing we start seeing in our workspace. There's actually uns, and it shows the value 11. So now if I do another calculation which I don't assign to anything, let's say 12 minus 6, the result will be 6, and since I'm not assigning it anywhere, it will again become uns. So now we see uns is 6, and this uns we saw before in Workspace now change the value. And the reason is that in Matlab Workspace there can only be each variable, or there cannot be different variables with the same name. Every variable has to be named differently. That's why in case you do an operation that goes into a specific variable and you don't give it a new name, the old value will be updated with the new one. So you have to be cautious and careful with this. All right. It is also possible to execute more than one command at a time. You can type them one after another and just separate them with commas or semicolons. So what does it mean? Those two operations I did before. Let's do them again. But now I want to do them in the same line, so I have to separate by a colon or a semicolon. Now, what is the difference? Well, the difference is that if I just put a comma, then I will see both results in that order I have typed them in here. So when I press enter, now I see uns 11 and uns 6. Once again, remember that they are both unnamed, so they go to variable uns, and in the workspace, the last known value is only the very last that was calculated, which in this case is 6. What changes if I use a semicolon somewhere? Well, let's put semicolon, for instance, here. So separation of the command still makes it so that Matlab considers them one after another. But now semicolon means that this last command, which is just before it, it will be executed and calculated, but the result will not pop up here in the command window. So now when I press enter, what will happen is that I will only see uns equal 11, but the workspace value of uns will be 6, because this 12 minus 6 is executed afterwards. Maybe even so that you see the change. I will change it here and make it, let's say, 12 minus 8. So now the final uns value will actually be 4 and not 11 nor 6. So I press enter. You see now we only see uns 11 because we see the result of this command, but we don't see as such the result here in command window for this one. But that calculation has been done and it has been recorded in the workspace as new value for variable uns. All right, let's move forward. So command window is one option for you, but a better one, much better, is actually working in an editor. And that means that you're actually creating a script, or also called M file, that in which you can put multiple commands as well. You can put them in separate lines. And the better thing is that you can save that file. It's a simple text file, so you can save it and open it on any other computer. Now, if you work in command window, all your work keeps stored in the command history. And that one, there is some command that you actually can put the list of commands from command window into a text file, but it's much less handy than actually working in an editor. So let's have a look how to create a script. Basically up here, we have a new script. So I could press directly here. I could also go into here of new and pick script here. So this is more useful if there are some more specific things you want to create. I'll just go with the new script. So now what happens is that Matlab puts in another working window in my environment, and it's called editor, or it says editor, and the file initially is untitled. You can detach this from the overall general window of Matlab. You can have separate window for editor and separate for the rest. It's your preference. I will keep them together, at least when we are working on smaller files. It will be easier to see immediately what is in the editor and what pops up in the command window. So what we did in the command window, I can now very well do in here. So I could put my calculations in different lines. I could make a few in one line. So this rule still follows, that you can put multiple commands in one line, but you can also put each in a separate line. That's usually absolutely your own preference, how you want to see things. With simple commands like this, it's really fine to put them all together. Once you start writing longer programs, you will have to give it up and start putting them in different lines, and of course your codes will start growing into dozens up to hundreds, or maybe in the future thousands of lines. Okay, so once I've typed my commands, I would like to run them. So now running the commands or executing the commands also can be done in different ways. The main one is that you just run the whole file. So running the whole file means that you basically want Matlab to execute all the commands that are there, and they will be done in this order that appears in your file. And running, you do either by pressing run here, so you just use the mouse cursor and run, or there are some key shortcuts they are different for Windows and iOS. OS X, sorry. So for Windows it's just F5, the function key, and for Apple that's Alt, Command, and R. So maybe a bit more complicated, but still does the job. So I'll just press run from here. Now, since my file was untitled, so I run it for the first time, Matlab is asking me what to do with it, basically. So it suggests that I should save it. Actually, it's not giving you an alternative. You have to save it before you run the file. Of course, you can save it with the same untitled name. This is perfectly fine, but you have to point a location where this file will be, and where this Matlab working memory will be. So now I'll find a place where I want it to be. Let's go to teaching. And let's make a new folder. And press enter. So I create the file. Or first I created a folder. Now I save the file. And now there is another command that pops up. So since now I have saved my file somewhere else than the current location of Matlab Brains, it is asking me, should it actually jump to that new location? And you have to tell it that yes, you agree, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to run your file. And what you should press here is change folder. Now add to path works a bit differently. That would mean that its brain still remains in the folder, which I can see here, but it kind of has an additional link, like a neural link to another folder, so you can refer to that folder. But normally you will be working in a specific folder, and that's what you should press change the folder. Add path we use, for instance, if you go into more complicated applications, and maybe you will get a toolbox from someone, so a bunch of functions and files that are located in a very specific separate folder. So then you can add that folder to path so that you can still keep your project in your own folder, but Matlab has that neural link to reach for the functions that somebody gave you and that are placed somewhere else. So that makes then work a bit neat, because you don't have to copy all those to your own location. Okay, so once I agreed, I changed the name, changed the folder. You can see now that the folder has changed up here. So now the brains of Matlab are with me in this new one. And so consequently, the calculation has been done. So now we can see here, it says, I actually didn't change the file name, so it's still called Untitled, but here it just kind of announces that it ran Untitled file, and one by one I can see the answers, except for the last one, again, because I have put semicolon after 3 divided by 3, but the answer, of course, is there, because in the end, Matlab still executed that command. So this was how to run the entire file. Another way is to run selected portion of your code. So what does it mean? I can pick, for instance, I want just these two to be run. So I select them, and then once again, you can either use a key shortcut, or you can use from here, when you right click, there is evaluate selection. So this one, and you have a hint in Mac, it should be shift function 7, so the function key and the F7. So in this way, it would just run those two lines. I will just click now, since I opened it in this way. So you can see that it now, here it shows again what it executed, and here we can see the results. So now there are the two, answer 11 and answer 4, and it's correct because these were the two things evaluated. And now again, answer is 4. It's not the one we saw from the previous run, just because that one has been overwritten. All right, so those, if you work in Windows, once you've selected that portion of commands, you can just press F9. That's the one that makes this quick. These are slightly more handy in Windows, just one key than in Mac. Okay, so let's move. Oh yeah, there is yet one more way I've got. First, one thing, an advantage of the editor also is that you can freely make comments for yourself. So you can create lines of text which are your own notes, but are not executed when you run the file. So you do it by using this % symbol, and after this one, you can type whatever you like. and MATLAB will not care what is there. It just omits completely that line and any other line that starts with a %. In some programming languages, you can start and close a comment in the middle of a line. In MATLAB, once the % appears, anything after it in that particular line is not executable anymore. So I could still have comment here and type something, but I cannot put comment here before my portion and then try to have close the comment and have that command executed. That's not possible. So once a % appears in the line, it means that that line becomes non-executable. So then if you run once again, MATLAB will just show those 3 results. Now I've removed one, or actually it shows the 2 and the third one is hidden, but it's the final answer. Yes, but about running, once again, I think it changed 2 years ago or 3. There is a new way to mark things in your code. It's so-called creating sections. So now a section is when you put 2% signs one after another. So that means, you see, now I will put something here. 7. So now you see when I click in those areas, like jumping between the 2 cases of double % sign, this area lights up in yellow. Let me make one more. And again, something. So now you see when I click in those places, they lit up and the rest is kind of inactive. So this gives you a chance to run only that portion which is in this section, so-called. So how do we do it? We press Control Enter in Windows, and I think it's Command Enter in Mac and Control Enter in Windows machines. So now what MATLAB did, it only ran these 2 lines, so this portion that is between those 2 double % cases. If I press run from here, it will run the entire file. Then the sections have no influence. But if you really want to run specific section, just use this Control Enter or Command Enter. Alright, so that's about executing files. Now, there are very strict rules how you call variables in MATLAB and how you call files in MATLAB. So basically, yes, this should actually say rules for naming files and not for file names, not variable names. So let me correct it here. Here should be files. Okay, so rule number 1. Every file name must begin with a letter. You cannot say if you're solving exercise 1, you cannot just name it 1 or 1 and letters. I think these days actually MATLAB prevents it by telling you it's not allowed. In older MATLAB versions, like still a few years ago, it would allow you to put that name, but once you try to run the file, that it would give you an error and you would be super confused. What has just happened and where is the error if I'm doing such simple math and there can't be anything wrong in the code and yet it's giving errors. So let's see what I mean. I will try to save this file with a new name and I will call it 1 and press enter to save it. So now MATLAB tells us MATLAB will not be able to run file unless you change its name. So it actually tells us it's not possible. I will call it 1 task. Oh, that worked. So actually that's okay. That's new, that it allowed saving, but it is still not allowed to actually use that kind of name. Now I will tell you why. When you start with a number, MATLAB thinks that you are actually referring to 1 as a numerical value. So in this case, it is confused that there is a 1 and then maybe some variable called task, but you've kind of typed it together, so it is just confused. Even more, if you just try to call it 1, the one with it actually didn't allow us, that again would mean that when you run that file in the old MATLAB versions, you would kind of redefine the meaning of number 1. So MATLAB would understand that whatever you typed in your script, those values and those executions now mean or give the meaning to what number 1 means in mathematics. So then if in the next step you actually need to say, let's say 1 plus 1, then you might be getting an error because it's actually trying to use that one as a completely redefined value and set of operations. So that's why it's not allowed. Always start your file names with letters. Now, what the name further can contain. So it can contain letters, it can contain digits once they appear after the letters, and the underscore character. Nothing else. So that means there cannot be any spaces between those characters, and there cannot be any special characters. So no dots, commas, slashes, dashes, nothing like that. Only letters, digits, and the underscore. So a good name for a file, if for instance you're doing task 1, then say task 1 like that. This is perfectly fine. Or if you would like some kind of space between task and 1, then put the underscore. This is okay. So I will save the file like this. And if I try to run it now, then I have my results in here. Okay. Something else I forgot to mention about command window. It has this feature that you can recall previous operations by pressing arrow up. So if I press arrow up, then I can see the most recent history and even marks here. For instance, when you start a new session and something has been executed, then there is a marker when this session has been started. But you can also see the previous ones. So sometimes they are longer, sometimes shorter. All right, let's move on. So about the naming, also there are some names of files you should avoid. So for instance, some of built-in functions in MATLAB. There are some very basic functions that you will quickly learn that they exist in MATLAB and you shouldn't use those names. So like sine, cosine, exp for exponential, sum for summing, prod for product, so multiplication of elements, this kind of stuff. I think that the most common mistake is initially the sum function, because you're trying to calculate some sum in your calculations and then you assign it to variable sum, and then you kind of again redefine for MATLAB what sum as a function actually means. And then there are some keywords that have specific role in MATLAB. So there is a list in here. There might be some more, especially with newer and newer MATLAB versions coming up, but the most common again. So break, case, catch, continue, else, else if, and for, function, global if, otherwise, persistent, return, switch, try, and while. And then there are some predefined variable names as well. So uns we've already talked about. There is pi, which is the value of number pi, 3.14 and so on. Eps means something super small, so it's 10 to power minus maybe 22, I think. That's something I should check. Inf means infinity. I and j, you can basically use them, but if you are doing some applications where you actually work with complex numbers, and if you've worked with them, then you know what I'm talking about, then I and j are basically reserved for that imaginary part of the number. And none means not a number. We will talk more about these in the next videos. But just to give you an example, so for instance, if I type pi here in command window, then I can see pi as a value. And same for eps. Let's check how big or small. So it's basically 2.2, and this notation e minus 16 means times 10 to the power minus 16. So otherwise it could be written like this, times 10 to the power minus 16. We will move on to the math operations in the next video, but basically this is the meaning. So it's basically something very small. It's used when you try to calculate some accuracy, and you can easily use eps as a predefined accuracy. All right, now when you work whether only command window or the editor, there are some useful variables which help you tidy up your environment. And so, for instance, I've been now doing a bunch of things here in the command window, and I want to a clean slate in terms of just not seeing any garbage in here. So that's what CLC is for. So if I put CLC and press enter, that's where so it's like I would compare it to wiping out your whiteboard, but still remembering the calculations in your head. So it's like you just clear the space, but you still know what you've done. That's why, even though I've cleared it in here, the workspace still contains the whatever calculations would be done in here. I'll run this file again. So again, I have some things executed in here now, and this CLC command works perfectly fine within editor. So I actually recommend, and I remind it many times, when you write your own editor files, always start them with CLC. It's just a good practice so that you don't get confused with what your code has displayed before, unless you really need to see. So it's not a must, but it's a good habit, I would say. Another one, even more important, or two of them, is clear. And you can either clear variables one by one, or you can clear all of them. Now we've only had one variable in here. We still haven't gone into assigning values to variables, but this answer, for instance. So if I type here clear all, which would mean if I have more variables in here, they should all disappear, Matlab will clear it. And again, you can put it in the editor, or you can type it directly in command window. But this clear all is even more important than CLC. You could also have clear vars, so that's actually also clearing variables. So alternatively, this one. So now what it would mean, so I select my portion of code and want to run the selection, and that's what happens. So now my workspace is clean and my command window is clean. So clear a command, now you can compare to forgetting. So you not only, by using CLC, which we just wiped the whiteboard, by clear we actually forgot what value we had. So once it's done, you have to do a certain calculation once again for Matlab to have that value stored somewhere, but otherwise it's all clear. And for instance, if you close Matlab session and open it up, so also the workspace is empty, because it's only from that moment you boot it up that you start storing variables until the moment when the memory is cleared. There is also command close all. This one will be useful when we start plotting things. Basically, it closes multiple figure windows at once, and when we start the data handling and plotting, then I will come back to this one. And there are also two called who and whose that help you list what kind of variables you already have used in your code and what types they are. Once again, when we write something that has a little bit more in, then I will show you how it works. All right. All right, so this gives you a nice overview of very basic things. There is one more thing which you will start using in Matlab, I hope very soon, is help. Now help is where you can find all the documentation and descriptions of how functions work. For instance, there are descriptions of whole entire tool packages. There's some theory, like if there's some function doing some mathematical operations, there will be the mathematical theory for it, and so on. And there are lots of demos in help also. So you can search documentation directly here by inserting some keywords, or I prefer picking this help icon from here. So it opens this separate window. And so in here, for instance, I mentioned at some point that there is a function sum for adding up things or for summing things. So I put that sum there, and then Matlab lists for me a few things which it thinks are the best hit for what I'm trying to do, and then you can click on those and check. So there are explanations, what's the syntax, so what's the right way to call a function, and then there are examples. So the best way to learn is to pick, there are always those kind of small portions of code that you can copy directly to your script, or there's even this button open live script. So use those to learn, to see how something that is already written, how it displays, what results it gives, and then play with it yourself to see how things change when you modify it. That's the best way to learn. But as we move on again, we will have a chance to see more. But as for the start, this is it.